So this video is all about the currency supply, fractional reserve banking, and long story short, this is going to be the craziest, most far-fetched video in the whole course, but it's completely true. Let's get into it. Let's look at purchasing power. Okay, so over here we have a weird chart, and this applies to pretty much every country. So whether it's the dollar or the pound or whatever you want. So we're going to plot two things here. So first of all, look at this left-hand side. So we have value of the currency over time. So if you look at 1913, and that's when the Federal Reserve was first created. That's the central bank of the US. The value of the dollar has done something like this. Something like that. And what you'll see is that the dollar has lost over 90% in value, maybe 95% in value, since 1913, in over sort of 106 years or so, which is interesting. You're like, why is that? It's the same for the pound. But it completely makes sense when you look at the right-hand side of the chart and you look at the currency supply, as in how many dollars are there in existence, as in how much actual notes or currency out there over time. So if you're looking at the same thing, what you'll find is that they've been printing currency like this. And so it's hopefully this makes sense. So basically, the more money you print, or the more currency you print, the more diluted your currency supply becomes. So guess what? The value declines. And this is the same in every single country on the planet. There isn't a single nation on the planet where they have not experienced this. And it's just basic maths. I mean, if let's say there's a mobile phone and it's worth 100 quid, and I don't know, let's say there's a couple £100 in this room, obviously this price is going to have, the value of this phone is going to have a certain price. But if I suddenly just go, if I just create money or currency out of my arse and go, right, this is now legal tender and it's worth £1 million, and then boom, it goes into our local economy. Disappeared, i.e. this room, guess what do you think the value of this price of this phone is? Well, the price of this phone is going to go up because there's now way more currency in the room, and the value of it, well, against I guess value and price is slightly different, but yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. So the value of your money is going to go down because there's simply way more currency in the room. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to get your head around. The next thing is a silly thing called fractional reserve lending or fractional reserve banking. Let's just quickly write this down. So fractional reserve banking. Okay, so what I'm going to teach you is what it used to be for a long time, and what it is now in reality. It's still pretty much the same, but with slight differences. So fractional reserve banking is basically how the main reason why there's 97% more currency on the planet than actual hard notes. Okay, and it starts with this. So let's say there is you. Okay, there's you. You worked really hard. There's supposed to be two legs there. You've worked really hard, and you go and deposit £100, or let's say, £100. Let's call it, keep it simple, $100 note into your bank. Okay, and let's have a bank over here. So the money, I'm getting confused with all these pens. Go away, lids. So the money goes in here, right? So the bank gets the $100. Now, fractional reserve banking, or fractional reserve lending, depending where you read it, is exactly what it says on the tin. The bank has to keep a fraction of whatever money you put in as reserve. Now, in the old days, it used to be 10%. So what would happen is the bank would keep 10% in the actual bank just in case you wanted to withdraw it, because no one goes to the cash point or the ATM and just withdraws their whole account, do they? They just take bits of it there and there. That's why they have a reserve. Squeaky chair time. So what then happens is banks always lend money to other banks, etc., or other big institutional entities. So they'll then go, they'll then lend it to another bank. Let's call it Bank 2. I'm good with my names. And guess what? They'll then lend money to Bank 2, but they have to keep £90. They have to keep £10 there, right? Because they have to keep the reserve. So what happens is 90 quid is then lent to Bank 2, right? And then the process goes on and on and on. So what happens? This bank now lends to another bank, but they have to keep 10% of this. So what is that? £9. So they can then loan £81, and so forth and so forth. And this goes on and on and on till it gets to the point where let's just do it a few more times. So this is where I probably need my calculator because I'm rubbish at maths. So 10% of 81 is £8 1p minus 81. Okay, so now this bank, because they have to keep 10% of that, they then loan $72.90 to this bank. And let's just do it one more time just for shits and giggles. What is that? 72.90 divided by 10. So they keep 7 minus 72.90, 65.61. So now they're sending 65.61. Okay. Here's the crazy thing, right? Don't forget, each bank is actually kept at 10% of each thing. So there's little bits of 10% everywhere. But let's just add up these big numbers. So we've got 65.61 plus 72.90 plus 81 plus 90 plus 100. So in just with just the involvement of 5 banks, the original $100 that's actually entered the banking system has morphed into $409.51. Now, this goes on a lot longer. So to the tune of 9 to 10x. Okay, so this is why I say 90 to 95% of all the currency out there on the planet is actually fake. It's just been plucked out of their ass. So this is the crazy thing about fractional reserve lending. The whole system is vastly inflated when there's actually only a tiny bit there. Now, bear all of this in mind, because this now takes us to the freaky beaky part of it all. So let's just move this over here. And this takes you to the whole financial system as a whole. Right, I'll need my pens. Where's my black pen? So it's going to look something like this. I'm so sorry, Christian. Christian is the videographer behind the screen, and he is like a master cartoonist, illustrator and stuff. So this is going to be cringing. Right, so that's that. Then yeah, let's come back to this. Right, so it all starts with the government, right? And let's say, let's call this government. You may need to zoom in. I'm not sure if you can see this. Hopefully you can see this. And what tends to happen with governments, because this is democracy, there's lots of flaws of democracy, but one of the big flaws is that every 4 to 5 years, depending where you are, there needs to be an election, right? So you have the new big honcho on board, whether it's Obama, Trump, or whatever, and you have 2 politicians all lying about things they can't really provide, and eventually one politician wins. But the thing is, let's take the US. So when a president wins, that person would have made loads and loads of promises. Now, how does a president fulfill on their promises? They have to actually go out and implement shit, and they have to go and buy things, spend things, blah, blah, blah. So what happens is, new person comes on. Just run my drawing, don't know if you can guess who this is. This US president comes on board and goes, right, actually, I now need to And by the way, he's a great guy. He's a great guy. He is the best. So he goes, right, I need to go and do stuff. I need $1 trillion to go and spend and build a new army, build whatever, build a wall. I need $1 trillion, right? So he then goes, right, I need $1 trillion. So he goes to his bank manager and goes, oi, I need $1 trillion, please, which is the US Treasury. So, which is basically his bank manager. So what happens is from the government to the Treasury makes its way is simply a US government bond. That's all it is, worth $1 trillion. Now, from now on, for the rest of your lives, whenever you hear the word bond in a financial sense, that is, cross it out and replace it with 3 letters, IOU. That is all a bond is. A bond is simply an IOU, like I owe you a can of Coke, I don't know, whatever. That's it. So in the Treasury, they change it all up. It's now turned into, I think, an orange or yellow document, and they convert it into what's called a US Treasury bond. So US T-bond or Treasury note. T-note, T-bond, same thing, worth $1 trillion. Now here is the crazy thing here. So let's draw this in red. You then have the 4 primary lenders. These are the big bastard banks out there, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, etc. And there's a little thing which you don't need to know, it's called open market operations. It's a bit like a shell game. What happens is this T-bond goes into the banking sector and they help facilitate things, right? And so eventually this US T-note, T-bond goes up. It's a bit like an auction. And then he gets to this big thing up here. Where's my black pen? This is as good as my drawing gets, guys. Nasty eyebrows. There we go. Do vampire squids have noses? I don't know. Let's call this a big vampire squid, if that even exists. So what happens is this T-note makes it all the way up to the Fed. This is the Federal Reserve, okay? The US Central Bank. And so the Fed goes, oh, you're such a great guy, you need $1 trillion. Sure, we'll take this US Treasury bond and we'll give you $1 trillion. So what happens is a Fed note makes its way, well, guess what, from the Fed to the banks, and through this sort of shell game, it then magically turns into money. So it's actually this banking element here that turns this Fed note into $1 trillion. So the Treasury gets the $1 trillion, and then the Treasury goes to the government, all right then, here's $1 trillion. Go spend, go do what you gotta do, right? Quick recap here. President needs some money, goes to the bank manager, says, oi, I need some money. Through paperwork, from basically US government bond, paperwork, silly paperwork. Long story short, it goes all the way upstream to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve takes in all of these chits of paper and goes, yep, all right then, I'll give you $1 trillion. And then $1 trillion magics into nowhere, into existence, and then ends up to where the government is, right? Now here's the thing. The US Federal Reserve is the US Central Bank, right? They have 2 responsibilities. There's 2 remits: to monitor and maintain the US currency supply, and also interest rates, US interest rates. It's only got 2 jobs. So what happens is whoever's at the Fed goes, okay, you want $1 trillion? They get into their computer and they go 1, 0, 0, 0 times 9. So they put in 9 zeros, enter. Boom, money comes into existence, and there we go. So it doesn't seem that crazy so far, but here's where it gets a little bit nuts. the government has to go and do all these silly programs, build a wall, whatever it may be. And no matter where he spends his money, it ends up back in the banking sector, right? If he wants to go and build a wall, he has to pay soldiers, contractors, workers, full stop. Where does the money go? It goes into their bank accounts. If he buys stuff from another country, guess what? It goes into a bank account somewhere. So long story short, the banks are here again. Whoops, banks. And then I'm just gonna, yeah. And then the money basically grows. So through fractional reserve banking, what do you think will happen if you suddenly plonk in $1 trillion up here? $1 trillion is going to turn into many more trillions, $9 trillion or whatever. So the government goes spending, money turns in, and let's just keep it simple, $1 trillion eventually through fractional reserve lending turns into $9 trillion. And this is it. So here's the sad thing. This is the public down here, right? This is the public. You probably can't even see that. We spend our blood, sweat, tears, talent and time working our guts out just to earn our small portion of income, whether it's $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, whatever it is. It's still peanuts compared to the grand picture here. And we spend all of our lives working 40 hours a week, etc., to saving up our little nest eggs. But guess what? We then have to pay a bully. A bully comes along. Well, it's not really a bully, but we basically have to pay taxes, right? And the tax man in the US is called the IRS. In the UK, it's HMRC. The tax man is simply a debt collector. That's all it is. It's simply a bailiff knocking on your window going, oi, you owe some money. So let's say all of this money goes to the IRS. Who does the IRS work for? The IRS works for the Treasury, right? So this money makes its way from the public to the IRS to the Treasury. Now, why does that happen? Who is the Treasury in debt to? You need to remember the Treasury owes the Federal Reserve $1 trillion. Now that $1 trillion isn't for free. That $1 trillion has interest on it. It could be 2%. So what happens is this Fed note will say, yeah, you owe me $1 trillion over 10 years, let's say, but we're going to add 0.5% interest on that per year. Okay. So that would otherwise be known as the 10-year bond. So yeah, so then this money goes from the IRS back to the Fed, right? Now you would have thought, being this massive entity up here, it would be a government organization, right? Controlled by the government, etc. Wrong. The Federal Reserve is a completely private entity. It's a private organization, and it has shareholders, and it pays its shareholders 6% divvies per year. Who are the shareholders? No one knows. It is one of the closest guarded secrets in the US. No one knows who the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are. Yet it's a private bank creating money out of nothing. They're lending it to the US government, and then basically the government is a debt slave to the Federal Reserve, and by default the whole of the US population is a debt slave to this private organization with private shareholders. Nuts. It was created in 1913. What we do know for a fact are who the founding fathers were. The people who founded and created the Federal Reserve was a guy called Senator Aldrich and a whole bunch of seedy billionaires back at the time. So J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, there's a Saudi family, and there's a few more. All we can do is speculate, but if I had an educated guess, I would also say that the big primary lenders, the big banks, also have a seat at the table. Goldman Sachs, etc., etc. I mean, I call it government sacks. Because if you look at the head of the US Treasury, or the top people in the US Treasury over the last 15 years, they're all ex-Goldman Sachs CEOs. It's absolutely nuts, pretty much. So pretty much everyone that's been high up in the US Treasury has been an ex-Goldman Sachs executive, hence government Sachs. I really do believe the Goldman Sachs has a seat at the table up here. So here's and so this is it's just absolutely nuts. It's the same in the UK as well. Please check out the Federal Reserve website. It says this. It says something like, when you or I write a check, it is fraud, but when the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. I think that's almost word for word on their own website. And so the crazy thing is, the banks, they profit a little bit from this bit here. Obviously the Fed profits up here, that bit there, all the way down here. And then again, when it comes back up, they're profiting all of the way. And you don't need to believe in the Illuminati or any weird conspiracy theories. You just need to look at freaking facts. This is the truth. This is the craziest truth out there. It's in broad daylight, but everyone's completely oblivious to it. And for a long, long time, I thought, because I always follow the money, and I thought, right, this is it. This is the Illuminati, the Federal Reserve. And then I found out a little bit more. So let's just quickly, I know you can't really see stuff over here, but let's just draw over here. And I thought, right, the Fed at the top of the food chain here, this is the Great White, or the big vampire squid. I was like, all right, they control the world, but they don't. There's other levels. So what you have here are basically, let's get a black pen out for this. You have nations. A lot of people think that countries run the world. No, wrong. Up here, and then you have central banks. And then you have the Troika. So you have the International Monetary Fund, you have the World Bank, and then you have the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements. Now there's a comedian out there who, I forgot who he was or what exactly he was saying, but he made a joke and it went viral around Facebook. And this person said, oh, Germany owes this much to this country, Spain owes this much to the UK, America owes this much to China, blah, blah, blah. Who do we, who actually do we owe all the debt to? Can't we just find this bloke and kill him and get rid of all world debt? And obviously everyone laughed. But the thing is, this person obviously didn't know about this or this. All the debt in the world is owned by the Troika up here, the IMF, World Bank, Bank of International Settlements. And what you'll actually find is that all the world banks have to do whatever the BIS says. The BIS is based in Basel in Switzerland, tiny, quiet city, and all the heads of the central banks meet up every month. It's normally on a Sunday at Basel and talk about very private things. So yeah, if you want to eradicate global debt, only these three entities can actually do it. And I actually think it's not about money these days. When you have things like Bitcoin coming along and affecting the status quo, Bitcoin affects this whole con. This is a legal con. Bitcoin, cryptos, it's completely affecting all of this. And so what I actually think, the only way they can sort of kick the can down the road and appease everyone and basically hold on to their reins of power for a little bit longer is they could wipe out global debt. What could happen is that they could, again, big ifs here, they could basically knock off 8 zeros from all global debt, let's say, 8 or 9 zeros, and go, right, the slate is now clean. Let's not get ourselves into this bother again. Let's start afresh and move on. That will please everyone. It will please governments who owe, like Greece, that owe a lot of money, or in fact every country owes all money. They're like, oh, sweet, don't have to pay off all that debt anymore. And even consumers, they could go, right, everyone's credit card debt is now gone. All your mortgage is gone, I don't know. But that is the way to keep the status quo. Because what happens is everyone's happy. They've still got their power structure in place, their control structure in place. But then guess what? In 50 years' time, we'll have exactly the same problem. And it's nuts. I know this is a long video. There's one other thing which I forgot, and it's called the debt ceiling. This is a little bonus points here. Every now and again, you'll probably hear a big buzzword called debt ceiling. The US has hit its debt ceiling, etc. Well, this is actually quite important, because what happens is, here's an easy way to explain it. Let's say you have a house, okay? And underneath the house, the sewage breaks, right? And your house fills up with crap, literal feces, okay? Shit all over the house. I don't think that happens, but let's just say it does. You had explosive shit all over the house. What would you do? You would obviously really quickly call a plumber or 10 to fix the sewage, right? And then a lot of cleaners, oh hell, just burn the house, get rid of it. But you'd clean up, right? That's what you'd do. What never ever, and let's say the house is all filled up with shit, you're literally swimming in shit now. What you would never even dream of thinking of is going, oh, we're running out of space because there's shit everywhere. How about, instead of fixing the problem and cleaning it up, how about we just get an extension put onto the house, but not sideways, let's go up, okay? Let's just make the house a bit taller. So now we've got in the basement, we now got shit, and then we've got the house. Let's do that. Said no one ever. But guess what? You haven't actually fixed the problem. The house is still filling up with shit. And the level of shit is going up and up and up, and you're like, oh, same problem. That was a surprise. Let's just make the seat, let's make it a lot bigger. So we're now living in a penthouse apartment up here. And everything's okay for a year or so. But guess what? It keeps on filling up, and it gets to the point where, like in 2017, you had a government shutdown, and like they hit the debt ceiling, and they keep hitting it to the point where they go, oh, we're now going to raise the debt ceiling by 50% or another $5 trillion. But guess what? It starts exponential growth and all of that. It just goes out of control, and then eventually this big tower of shit is going to fall over, and we're going to have shit everywhere. I wonder how many times I can say shit in a video. So replace the word shit with debt. That's exactly what the world is doing. Every country having a complete tower of debt, and they're going to fall. At the moment, it looks like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But yeah, that's a little bonus round. Hopefully that makes sense. Bit of a long video, but with all these bits of paper, you can see just how crazy the world is, and how you and I are debt slaves to a private company that earns profit from us. Nuts. Pen drop.